Greetings, Kindred. I am Voivode Maquette, and welcome to my World of Darkness. And today is episode 14 of the Thicker Than Water recap. Now, before we get into that, I just want to say that if you guys are not acquainted with Lore by Night, please check that out. It is an amazing podcast, and there are hours and hours and hours of videos up. And the reason I'm pointing this out right now is because, first off, he was a massive inspiration for me to start my channel. Another also is that his Kindred 101 video, which is amazing, was the entire inspiration for the session 1 of the game that we're running now. Check out his stuff. He's going through some hard times, and I gotta say that my heart goes out to him, all my thoughts, and just give that guy some attention. He deserves it. Now, getting on to the actual game, I do want to point out that a few of the players were not here. So unfortunately, we have a very condensed recap this week. Probably going to end up making it shorter because of that. But there was so much character building elements to what happened this past session, given the fact that I only had 2 players. Tonight's recap is going to exclusively be with our dear Tony and Henry, Dr. Henry. And it was very interesting because some of the players were just not available to come this session. And but the game progressed, and we actually got some pretty interesting stuff taken care of. The game opened with the knowledge that Lady Catherine and Alice were going to go and try to find a gift for Queen Anne to attend that party, which is supposed to start tonight. Now, then we come to Tommy Smith, our Nosferatu, who has decided that he is going to go ahead and attempt to find Richard de Ward, the Nosferatu who has one of the items that the Cult of Mithras is after. Leaving Tommy and Henry alone, and both of them feeling a bit hungry from the activities of the nights before. As they're discussing on what exactly they need to do, they hear through the window of their hotel an ambulance. And then they realize, oh, we're right across the street from the hospital. We should probably go over there and feed, now that they understand that Dr. Henry has a bit of an issue with his feeding. Not exactly understanding why, but he was asleep during the family reunion, so that would be the case on that one. Crossing the street, they enter through the emergency room, and it is a massive indication of how things have changed. Instead of seeing just people on cots stacked up and waiting for the doctor who may or may not come, they see people sitting in molded plastic chairs, watching home and garden television. Chemicals in the air covering the scent of the blood that could be, and the triage nurses wearing some very strange clothes indeed that they're not 100% sure is appropriate for the time. Once they're able to actually finally get someone's attention, Dr. Henry explains that they're here to identify a coma patient, and they are swiftly directed to go to the other side of the building and enter through the front main entrance. When they get over there, some interesting things happen as they walk into the ridiculous shopping mall-like style construction that you have inside hospitals nowadays. This is completely different from the way things were before they went into torpor 7 decades ago. While trying to explain to the nurses at the front counter, they're running into a little bit of an issue. Tony has decided to stand back and keep an eye on things that are going on around because he's not a person who's familiar with the hospital system. However, he can tell just by watching the interaction that the reception is a little nervous on what's going on, and also that security is starting to gather. Dr. Henry's not really making the most sense, as he's saying that he needs to identify a coma patient, but is having a hard time giving a name, and it's going all over the place, because he's basically just asking for access to areas of the hospital that he should have no reason to be able to get to. Just before security swoops in on Dr. Henry, however, another man with graying hair who's wearing scrubs walks up, and he's kind of a low-level worker in the hospital. He puts his hand on Henry's shoulder and shakes his hand and says, "Dr. Banerjee, it's so good to see you," and explains to the reception that this is a well-respected man who's connected to the Banerjee family, who's been donating money to this hospital for years, and that he's very high standing, and that he'll be happy to help him with anything that he needs, and be able to offer up his clearance to whatever Henry may need. He shakes Henry's hand and says that he's happy to see him again, and they walk off, leaving Tony alone in the main lobby. So those two walk off, and then they find a small room where they can discuss. Henry has no idea who this person is. It's completely boggling his mind. But he explains to him that he's his ghoul, that he's been staying alive all of this time, switching identities, staying as a low-level worker within the hospital for decades, making sure that money from Henry's estate goes into the hospital as donations, just as he had requested before he had gone into torpor. This does send a flood of memories back into Henry's mind, and he is having a bit of a hard time, but he does understand that this hospital used to be important to him in life, and that this Winston is here to help him out in this horrible situation. And those two do spend some time talking. As Dr. Henry Banerjee and Winston walk off down the hall and out of sight, Tony walks up to the front desk and starts discussing with the receptionist that he's here to see a person who was admitted last night. Racking his mind, he's able to remember the name Stanley Harrington. That was the name of the trans man who was beaten the night before and brought into the hospital this morning. Luckily, he had overheard the name, and he was able to gain visitor clearance into the hospital. He took his picture, got his tag, and walked off with the hospital room in mind, where he was supposed to be going. While he's wandering through the hospital and keeping an eye out for the room number that Stanley is supposed to be staying in, he does come across the blood donation center. And after some fumbling around with the receptionist over there, decides that he's going to try to come back later. He acts as a nervous donor and decides that now is not the proper time to be doing that he's too nervous, and they're going to be closing for the evening anyway. Wandering down the hall, he does, however, find Stanley's room, and as he's watching Stanley interact with another friend of his, a lovely lady at first, except Tony realizes that the makeup is smudged and well worn. A 5 o'clock shadow is coming in on the woman's face. This is another transgender friend of Stanley's who's come to make sure that Stan's okay. They're watching RuPaul's Drag Race on television and laughing, and Stanley is coughing in pain because it hurts to laugh. But Tony is inspired by Stanley's conviction on staying who they are, that they're not going to allow an incident like this, another one, to stop them from being who they are and living their life. And Stanley just absorbs that humanity and remembers that this was the kind of thing that they used to go through themselves. Tony can taste dirt along with blood as their face hits the ground. They began by punching Tony, but now they swing wide kicks into their face and stomach. Tony curls into a ball and tries to cover their head, waiting for it to end. Tony never should have tried to shortchange them, but that isn't the real reason. They think you deceived them, wearing trousers, dressing like a man. So, these men who pride themselves on never hitting a woman are kicking Tony because they think that he is a woman. Still, Tony took 2 of them down before they got him on the ground. You'll come back for the rest in time. It's such an interesting thought of this person who went through this in the early 1900s. Of all these issues that just haven't changed. Luckily, after the conversation with Winston, Henry remembered that Tony had come in with him and explained to Winston that they need to feed. So they stop by the coma ward. Winston makes sure the area is clear. Henry feeds on a coma patient, which causes their readings to spike. The body goes into seizure, and Henry's just able to pull themselves away and lick the wound as nurses rush in to make sure everything's fine. Winston explains to them that the man just went into seizure, and they're not sure exactly what happened. Henry and Winston rush out of the room, and they decide that, remembering that Tony exists, they need to find him now, because now there's 2 vampires loose in this hospital. Winston escorts Henry to the security office, where they meet a man named Richie, who is at first confused that this man that he's never met before is walking in. But when Winston explains that this is Dr. Henry Banerjee and his family is very important to the hospital, Richie's eyes light up and he remembers exactly where he's heard that name before. He stands up and, fumbling, shakes Henry's hand, and Winston explains that he was interested in seeing what the security of the hospital looked like. So he is able to watch all the security cameras. There are not many because there are privacy issues. However, there are security cameras in the elevators. While they're checking everything out, Henry does spot Tony getting off an elevator on the 2nd floor and heading down the hall. This was when he was on his way to see Stanley at the room. While Tony is caught in his daydream, Henry and Winston approach, explaining to Winston everything that's going on and also ignoring the situation that happened with the blood bank earlier. They all head outside, Winston leading the way, and into a back alley. It's dirty. This is where the garbage gets collected. And as they're following Winston, he walks up a small little set of stairs and bangs on a door that says employees only. A dirty, almost subhuman looking security guard answers the door. He's pockmarked and needs a shave. His rotten teeth are exposed as his mouth curls into a smile. He's like, "What do you want?" Winston pulls out a wad of cash and says, "I'm in need of some of your services. A large order, if you don't mind." The man looks him up and down, scoffs at him, takes the money, shoves it in his pockets without even counting it, and walks inside, shutting the door behind him. The trio sit in the alley, discussing exactly the situation that they're in, explaining that they had just woken up and they're trying to get their bearings back in this world, when the door slams back open. The security guard hangs out the door slightly, holding an old styrofoam cooler with a flimsy little red handle, grunts at the 3 men, and chucks the cooler at them. As it hits the ground, the lid pops off and there's blood bags inside. At first, Henry and Tony are mesmerized by the concept of blood in a bag. Back in their day, when people donated blood, it was collected in glass bottles. But this seems like it might work pretty well. Tony grabs a bag and sinks his fangs in and satiates his hunger, as a rustling in the trash at the end of the alley catches Henry's attention. As he turns around and looks at them, Henry loses himself in thought. It was only a cat. It wasn't even a very nice cat. It always hissed when it looked at you. But it seems several people had some sort of affection for the nasty creature. And so Father says that Henry must be punished. It's unfair. He tells Henry that You need to study. And when you do, he and Mother look at Henry like he's not even one of their children. How can you learn the way things work if you can't take them apart? It was a messy business, but an informative one. Yet that look of shame seared into his soul. He's brought back to reality after Tony finishes his second bag. Winston, regrettably, has to go back to work, but asks to be caught up with later, that he still lives in his old apartment, and he wants to hear from his master soon. As Winston disappears around the hill, the two kindred discuss what their next move should be exactly, and they decide that necromancy might be the way about things. Tony's confused, doesn't exactly know what Henry's discussing, but Henry got this idea. The letter sent to them by Pater Thomas had said that Mithras had unfortunately passed on. Now, the conversation goes to, can a god die? But they also understand that Mithras was trapped in vampiric form by being embraced by a fourth generation Ventru. So, needless to say, he's either been set free or he's one of the restless, because his will is too strong to just move on. They decide they're going to go to Westminster Abbey, one of the holiest places in all of London. And they're going to utilize one of the stones from the walls of the cathedral to enact a ritual that Dr. Henry knows. An ancient ritual known as the Knowing Stone. This should allow them to contact any wraith if they know their name. And they believe by performing this ritual on this incredibly ancient and powerful edifice that has been infused with so much faith, they should be able to amp it up to contact the wraith of Mithras himself, to ask him what the next move in their mission should be, to get direct orders from their god himself. So they decide to take the tubes, the underground train. It hasn't changed much. They find an entrance, walk down, and after seeing a couple of punk kids just jump over the gate to the loading area, they decide to do the same. They don't have money to get through, and they don't have these cards that the people seem to just be touching to the little glass plate. There's no more turnstile, there's just a gate. They're so confused on this, but they hop over without a big deal, receiving dirty looks from paying customers. When they get on the train, however, they have a very interesting interaction. There's not many people there. There's a homeless person sleeping under some newspapers on one of the benches that's further up in the car that they're in, and there's also a young girl in her late teens wearing a man's suit. Both Kindred, Henry and Tony, feel like they've seen this girl before. And as they step a little closer, the girl notices them and says, "Tony, Hank, how you doing?" They're very confused. "Do we know you?" was the only thing they could say. They're like, "Well, we haven't seen each other in years, but I'd like to say so." It comes to their mind, it flashes to their mind that this is Juliet Parr, the sheriff of North London. At least they think it's the sheriff of North London. Juliet Parr has gotten a promotion in the last year or so. She says that she's in town for the party. They ask her what type of promotion she received, and nonchalantly says, "Justicar." A feeling of fear just washes over them. They realize that they are in the company of the most powerful Malkavian in the Camarilla. They have a conversation, pleasant, She is a bit distracted. She's on her cell phone and texting away. They have a hard time trying to understand exactly what she has to be saying, and they say that they hear that there's a storm coming. And she just looks at them and says, "It's London, it rains here all the time." And they explain, no, a different type of storm, something bigger. And she looks off into the distance. And when she finally is able to snap out of it, she looks directly at them and says, "Well, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition." The two Kindred write her off. This is madness coming out of a Malkavian. Why would anybody worry about the Inquisition? They've been gone for 5 centuries, for the most part. The rest of the train ride is actually pretty tame. Malkavian rantings, diamonds hidden amongst rocks. Not much is understood, but she does teach them how to use a phone properly. Exactly what it's for, how it can be used to seek information. They do learn a lot from their time with Juliet. And when they get off the train and they leave her there, she just says goodbye, and that she'll see them at the party. They arrive at Westminster Abbey and are shocked to find the large fences surrounded the entire thing. But they are able to find a small place where people have gathered, where teenagers who should probably be at home in bed from hours ago listen to music and smoke cigarettes. Lovers make out on benches. And as Tony and Henry are quietly going about their work trying to not be noticed, Henry is able to drain a cup of blood from his wrist. He's able to scrawl Mithros's name on a brick, not even bothering to remove it from the church itself, wanting to use the church as an amplifier for the ceremony. That's when it happens. Absolutely nothing. Mithras is still alive. And that's where I call post. We are going to continue this night, next game session, as now they believe that Mithras is still alive. I'm kind of interested in seeing what they're going to do with this information, and truthfully, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with this session. I didn't want to advance in the story too far if I was missing 3 players. 1's hard enough. But 3? No, I didn't want to play catch-up with anybody, and plus, the information that the characters have are going to be transferred over to the minds of their regular characters. So, another thing is the fact that these characters are so lightweight. Like, seriously, some of these are ridiculous. In fact, we were looking at the, who is this? Our dear Ventru Lady Catherine Montague has 1 strength, 1 point in athletics, 1 point of dominate. It's actually pretty, the character's actually pretty pathetic. But what I have decided to do is I'm going to give the players 3 XP every single night, and they can spend it as they will. That is not typically how I like to do things. I like to give 1 or 2 XP a game session, and then after the story, do a downtime action and have like a dump of XP, like 15, 20 XP in between the game sessions to basically explain the time that has passed and the work that they've put into things, and their characters can have a little bit of a jump of power. But I realize that the characters aren't ever going to advance when they're playing this. I'm keeping track of the XP, and the players will get that to put into their characters at the end of this, but I do want their characters that they're playing now to advance along, become more and more powerful as time goes by, and actually be powerful kindred by the time we get to the end of this story. I understand that this was not the biggest, most epic game session, but I do find the smaller character building sessions to be more meaningful. I am Voivode Maquette. This is my World of Darkness. and I look forward to sharing what happens next with you. Good evening.